DM with us at all about the event. And other than that, we'll share everything that comes out of the event, including a fact page, resources shared with all of you afterwards in a folder. So if there are any lingering questions, please feel free to reach out or refer to those documents that we share later on with you all. And let's go ahead and get started with Erica, our Executive Director, to kick us off.
Thanks so much, Veronica and Sarah. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Erica Sussman, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for Survivor Agency and Justice. CSAJ is a national organization that sits at the intersection of economic inequity and domestic and sexual violence. CSAJ envisions a world where all people have equal access to physical safety, economic security, and human dignity. And the way that we go about doing that is by promoting advocacy approaches that remove systemic barriers, enhance organizational responses, and improve professional practices to meet the self-defined needs of survivors. Two of CSAJ's projects are funded through the Office on Violence Against Women at the Department of Justice, and those are the Consumer Rights for Survivors Initiative, as well as the Access to Justice for Survivors project. And today we are hosting a town hall on economic advocacy for survivors during COVID-19. This convening is in direct response to a call to action from all of you, advocates in the field who have been reaching out to us and sharing the complex barriers and challenges arising during this unprecedented time in our global history. Back in March, on March 20th, CSAJ held a solidarity call where we held space to process the early impacts of the coronavirus on survivors and advocates working with survivors. And that call unearthed key economic issues, organizational challenges, and systemic inequities facing survivors and advocates. CSAJ shared a newsletter that drew upon these insights and the strategies of brilliant and creative advocates all over the country. If you haven't read it yet, we will absolutely share that back with you again. And then, as Veronica mentioned, this past week, CSAJ, alongside powerful partners, launched a national survey on the economic impacts of COVID-19 on survivors. And we look forward to that data, which will be shared back, of course, with all of you and be used to strengthen advocacy and fuel systems and policy change. All of that said, over the past 2 months, unbelievably 2 months, we have been in close contact with many of you, advocates and programs and coalitions who continue to problem solve in real time to meet the profound economic barriers facing survivors. We are very grateful to have all of you with us today as part of this movement, a movement that is necessitated by a pandemic that has revealed what all of us have known for a very long time, that the economic inequities impede access to safety for survivors, and that this is particularly so for survivors who are living at the margins. And while these inequities have long existed, this moment calls upon each of us to mobilize in ways that are in many ways first nature to us as advocates. Yes, the economic challenges facing survivors are profound, and we, advocates, organizers, lawyers, agitators, strategists, were made for this moment. Together, we are building power to navigate uncharted territory and to transform the economic landscape facing survivors. So we're grateful to have you with us today. And right now, what I'd like to do is pass over the program back to Yvette and Isla.
Great. Thanks so much, Erica. Hi, everybody. I'm Yvette Butler, CSAJ's outgoing Director of Capacity Building and Systems Change. And I won't take up too much of your time, but I just wanted to let you all know that sort of my role in this is if folks want to ask questions in the chat or the little Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, like I will be collecting those questions and making sure that they get to all of our panelists. So whenever you have a question, feel free and ask it, and it will be collected and answered in the order it was received. And let me hand it over to Isla.
Thank you, Yvette, Erica, Veronica, and Sarah. Like they said, my name is Isla. I'll be serving as moderator. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're so happy that you were able to make time to join us and in having this very important conversation. I would like to welcome our amazing team of panelists, Andrea Bob Stark with the National Consumer Law Center, Jamie Andre with Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at Indiana Legal Services, Laura Russell, Director of the Family and Domestic Violence Unit at Legal Aid Society, Katie Von der Linde, an expert who offers training and education to advocates on issues of economics and survivor-defined advocacy, Allison Randall, Vice President for Policy and Emerging Issues at the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and Joanna Ain and Emmanuel Nieves, Associate Directors of Policy at Prosperity Now. Like Yvette and Sarah and Veronica, I think mentioned, many of you submitted questions and areas of interest that you wanted our panelists to talk about today. We thank you for your submissions. And while we go to our panelists and let them make their introductory remarks, please start typing your questions now. I know it was said before, but you can also raise your hand. You can ask out loud. So with that, again, welcome and thank you. And let's go to Andrea to get us started.
Hi everyone, Andrea Bopp Stark. I'm an attorney with the National Consumer Law Center. And I was able to read some of your questions and concerns, and it seemed very clear to me that you're all very concerned about your clients' financial well-being during this time and how to access financial resources for your clients, and that there are very limited options and limited resources available, and how do you prioritize those? So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that and answering questions regarding the debt that a lot of your clients are now coming into and will come into, and how to deal with that debt and how to prioritize paying that debt if they're able to pay certain debt but not other debt. I also want to point you to the National Consumer Law Center's website. We have an amazing COVID-19 page, and you'll be getting a handout that, hold it up, looks something like this. It might be in the chat box, but it'll definitely go out to you after this in an email. And it's a summary of some of the resources we've developed at NCLC to help consumers financially. You'll see the first part of it is directed towards helping your clients individually and helping consumers. We do have a book called Surviving Debt, which is this, through the National Consumer Law Center. We put that book out every couple of years. We update it, and we have just updated it, and we are providing that book for free online during the COVID-19 emergency. And the link is in the handout. That book is an amazing resource for your clients to read, for you to read, to help your clients on not just prioritizing debt, but also what options are available to pay that debt and to deal with that debt. And so this is a book that's good all the time, but especially now that we're facing all of these financial challenges. And then just back to the handout, the second part of the handout relates to what states can do. And so I just want to put a big push in there for advocates to work with your legislators, with the attorney generals, with the court system, with whomever you can to help influence and change policies that are going to help consumers during this time. Because as we know, the federal relief options are not very extensive. And so we really have to do something on the state level, and we're looking for advocates to really push on the state level to try and get protections in place. And my area of focus during all of this has been really with mortgage relief. So primarily forbearance agreements, what are they? How do you get one? What happens at the end of that? So if you have questions around that, I'm happy to answer those, and whatever other type of mortgage relief. Also debt collection. I focus on debt collection protections from harassment and abuse, and bankruptcy. So if you have any questions around those, happy to give it a stab. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. Let's go to Jamie.
Thank you, Isla. My name is Jamie Andre. I'm a volunteer lawyer with the Indiana Legal Services Low Income Taxpayer Clinic. I worked for Indiana Legal Services from 1979 until I retired at the end of 2017. And from about 2006 on, until now, my primary focus has been on solving survivors' tax problems. I've also been one of CSAJ's project partners for at least 5 years. And I'm also the CSAJ expert advisor in tax. This relationship has been wonderful for many reasons, including that it has enabled me to reach advocates like you for survivors in ways that just would otherwise not have been possible. Primarily what I do now as an LITC volunteer and as a CSAJ partner is help survivors solve their tax problems, train family law attorneys and other advocates about tax issues which impact survivors. I prepare written materials for other advocates as well as for the survivors themselves, and occasionally comment on Treasury regulations and IRS materials and forms that impact survivors. So I've been asked to start out by just mentioning the questions that I can answer and the issues that I can discuss during today's meetings. You can feel free to ask me about issues related to the economic impact payments, the EIPs, which are commonly referred to as the stimulus payments. You can ask, where to get the most up-to-date information and who does and who doesn't qualify and how much you get if you qualify and how you get the stimulus payment, and how you can find out when and what is and what form is coming your way. I can also answer questions about what survivors can do when something goes wrong, such as an abuser gets the survivor's stimulus check or checks for the survivor's children, or an identity thief gets the stimulus payment, or perhaps the survivor's share of a stimulus payment goes to their spouse's child support arrearage. I mean, these are things that go wrong. And I'm also able to answer other questions about current IRS issues, such as whether tax collection activity is continuing during the pandemic. And if it is, how do we deal with that? And I can also explain to you where survivors can get tax help. I do want to give you some caveats. First of all, no one is really expert right now when it comes to answering some of these tax questions. Not the tax attorneys, not Congress who created the stimulus payments, and not the IRS, which was given the task of getting these payments out to the public as fast as possible. There are many, many unanswered questions, and there have been many unforeseen problems. Maybe they weren't unforeseeable, but they were unforeseen. And the rules and procedures continue to be created and changed on almost a daily basis. This is really a fluid, rapidly evolving situation. What was true yesterday may not be true tomorrow. The IRS is attempting to keep information up to date on its website, but changes are happening quickly. And so sometimes what's on the website doesn't necessarily reflect what's actually happening. So that's the first caveat. Second, there are currently no meaningful solutions to many of the most pressing stimulus check related problems that survivors face. So at the present time, IRS is not going to take back stimulus checks that went to the wrong person, and IRS is not going to issue a replacement stimulus check to a survivor who didn't get one because it went to the wrong person or to an inaccessible account. While there may be some solutions to some of these problems, these tax-related problems, you are probably not going to find them particularly helpful right now. Third, this is the last caveat you'll be happy to hear, but third, IRS, which, for many years has been underfunded and understaffed and working with a computer system that dates back to the dinosaur era, it is also having to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic as it impacts the workplace, just like the rest of us. So what that means is that while parts of the IRS are open for telephone business, many parts are not open yet. And you cannot rely with certainty on the IRS website to tell you who's answering the phone and who isn't, because it doesn't necessarily match up with what's actually happening. Similarly, over a month's worth of mail is sitting in trailers lined up outside of IRS campuses around the country. So even if the pandemic were over today, it's going to take IRS a very long time to catch up on all this correspondence. So forms like the IRS 8822 change of address form are not getting processed in time to impact where checks are being mailed to taxpayers. So these are kind of the things you need to sort of keep in mind, at least when we're talking about tax issues. However, before I turn the microphone over to the next panelist, I do want to add this. Try not to be discouraged by what I just said. There are things that you can do to help survivors. Although the solutions to tax problems may not be forthcoming immediately from IRS. They may take longer than the survivors we are trying to help need them to take. But as you will learn today, particularly from the other panelists, and I hope from me as well, you really can make a difference. We are in this together and we cannot give up. There are things that we can get done and that we will get done.
Thanks, Jamie. That was great. Let's go to Laura. Please.
Hi, I'm Laura Russell. So I'm the director of the Legal Aid Society in New York City's Family Domestic Violence Unit, and we specialize in contested divorces. So a lot of what we do are contested and uncontested divorces. I also have handled consumer issues as well as bankruptcies for debtors. So I work with my staff on the interplay of those three areas, and we're going to be seeing that a lot. The bankruptcy courts are open. Many of the state courts are not open. Many people are not filing divorces or can't file divorces, but the bankruptcy courts are open, and so there's going to be a lot of issue with when the bankruptcy occurs and when the divorce is happening. What other issues we're going to be seeing are there going to be a lot of modifications for child and spousal support or alimony, and something to consider when you're thinking about asking your client to go into court, even for a enforcement, is you do not want, if the other side is not earning what they did when the order happened, you don't want to send your client in there for enforcement. It's going to be an open opportunity for the other side to say, wait, I'm not earning this, I want to downwardly modify. Whereas right now, even though you may not be getting the money because they're on unemployment or they're not working, at least the order is accruing. So timing is going to be essential. What we saw, and I was practicing during the downturn of 2007, so I can tell you that what we saw during the downturn was very many motions and arguments in court that everything in the marriage had gone down significantly in value, that we should look at new valuation dates, that the real estate market tanked, as we all know. Unfortunately, in big cities like where I am, we're expecting that again. Some of the fallout we're also going to see is the 2-family homes. If the tenants are not paying rent, they're going to be going into foreclosure. So what we're going to see is a large fluctuating a large amount of fluctuating assets, a higher amount of debts. And once this all, I fully expect once this all ends and courts are reopened, that the credit card companies that sue in bulk are going to do that again. And so, that's going to be a big issue for our clients. Timing is going to be a huge issue for our clients. And we're going to see a lot of batters who are the asseted spouses or the moneyed spouses who are going to be filing immediately because everything is going to be less than it was when this started. So, so those are some things for you to be careful of and to think about. I am also a technical advisor with the center, so I'm always happy to talk to you about whether you should file divorce or bankruptcy first, do the bankruptcy together. There are many options there when one is filing bankruptcy, as well as how consumer debts interplay into divorces and who's liable for whom in divorces, which is completely different than who's liable for what in the consumer credit context. So, so I welcome any questions on that. And I just would say, as a warning to clients who are not getting their monies, whether it be any kind of support right now, that now might not be the best time to be filing for any kind of contempt or modification, even if they can, because it's going to trigger a reevaluation of the order, and that might not be in the client's best interest. But again, I'm happy to talk to anyone on any of those topics, whether on this call or if there's any questions afterwards, or if there's any specific cases that people want to talk about, I'm available. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Katie Von der Linde, you're up next.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be a part of this town hall, this really important topic. So my name is Katie Von der Linde. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm just really happy to be a part of CSAJ's technical assistance team. I am a social worker by training and trade, and I've been working on issues of economics and intimate partner violence for over 20 years. I've experience in working in shelter and working in non-residential organizations as an economic advocate. So a lot of years thinking about these economic issues and how they really relate to intimate partner violence. So first, I want to start off and say thank you so much for all of you for the hard work that you're doing. Usually when we're thinking about advocacy and the work that we're doing, we think a lot about the fear that we are dealing with secondary trauma. In fact, when working with people and hearing the stories, that we're taking some of that trauma on. But this time is really difficult because we're actually dealing with shared trauma, that many of us have our own fears around economics or what's happening for our children or what our own health of our other people. And so we're dealing with that in our own lives, but also in the lives of our survivors that we're working with. And in addition to that, we're worried about how they are differentially impacted. So not only are we dealing with shared trauma, but we're dealing with some guilt and some concerns and worries about this. It's a very challenging time. We see this lack of resources, this lack of answers, and as Jamie was talking, there's just not some answers in some of these areas. The other thing is that a lot of us haven't had a lot of training in areas of economics and financial work with survivors, and most of us don't come to advocacy, at least in my experience with an intimate partner violence, because we're really good at working around issues of money. Or we're good at thinking of talking about issues of money in our own lives. So one of the challenges that we're coming up with is what a lot of people need now is money. And we're not finding a lot of easy resources to find the money. So sometimes working on financial issues can feel so disheartening and frustrating that we sometimes turn away from it because we don't know what to do or how to help. One person wrote in their questions, they said that I don't even know how my clients are going to afford basic necessities. Another person said, I work in domestic violence, and one of my biggest fears is the people that I help dying. These are real concerns. These are things that we're really struggling with. And I'm going to echo Erica on this. The good news, I think, is that advocates and attorneys and agitators and activists are resourceful, creative, and what we're skilled in is complex safety planning. And this is what economic work is, because safety is distinctly tied to folks having economic resources and economic choices. We're also skilled at working in the midst of trauma. We're open to learning and trying new things. And that usually actually a lot of what we learn about doing work with survivors is through trying it. And so we don't have to be experts in credit or debt or budgeting or seeking resources to be able to start. And we just have to try and start looking. So I think being here and being a part of the town hall is such a good part of the process for a lot of us. So I think we are perfectly situated right now. So what I really like talking about and thinking about is this idea of survivor-centered economic advocacy. And what we see is when we think about doing a lot of economic work, we may read a certain guide that says, do this, don't do that. And it seems that that is very black and white. But we all know that when working with survivors, their safety makes things so much more complicated. So that a simple directive to look at a bank statement may not be possible for our folks because they may not know what bank they're banking at, or it may put them at greater risk. And that our clients in trauma also are sometimes seeking direction from us and are asking, what should I do next? What should I do next? And so what I'm asking us to do as advocates and attorneys is to really try to figure out how we can take a step back to be survivor-centered in these ways. So what that takes and what that means for us is that we have to do financial work with the lens of safety. We have to understand survivors' own priorities and their goals and their values around money, which aren't things that we talk about a lot. But if I'm working with a survivor who has a debt to a family member, and I think, well, that's a low priority. You should be worrying about some other debt, maybe that a creditor is going to come after you. However, that debt to that family member may be a very high value and a very, very important thing for that survivor to take in as a priority, because that may be their safety net, their family. And so part of the values and the ways that people are coming to the issues of economics is some of their cultural experiences, some of their different life experiences. And so I think this is all coming to a head right now for many of us as we're looking at trying to help survivors around economics. And so I'd love to talk more and answer questions about how do we start, how do we do this work, what questions do we ask, how do we direct people in the right way, and still to still balance what survivors need, what their bigger safety concerns are, figuring out how to prioritize that, and to work on those issues. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to hearing from all the panelists.
Thank you, Katie. Let's go to Allison Randall.
Thanks. Hey everyone, I'm from the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and we represent the state and territorial domestic violence coalitions, but we also provide a lot of technical assistance, not just to coalitions, but also to state administrators, to transitional housing providers on issues of confidentiality, HIV/AIDS, economic justice, and more. And we have a lot of resources. I've got a lot of URLs that we will share with you, and some follow-up resources to send. But big picture, as we look at what's happening across domestic violence service providers, particularly shelter programs and other non-residential programs, we're seeing what I know you are experiencing, right? Which is that there's tremendous variation. In many places we're hearing, my gosh, we're getting so many more calls to our hotline, or calls to 911 have gone up, and other places they've gone down. And it's very different depending on what's happening in your community. Some places have done a great job of advertising that domestic violence programs are still open. We're still available. You can contact us for help. In other places, survivors don't know that domestic violence shelters and service providers are still open, or people may be afraid to work with police in their community or be concerned that courts are closed. So it's quite variable. And the National Domestic Violence Hotline hasn't yet seen a surge in calls, though they have gotten several thousand folks talking about COVID-19 as part of the domestic violence experience, that perpetrators use that to increase isolation, and they're doing things like burning insurance cards, refusing to let someone get tested, saying, of course, if you leave me, you're going to get the virus. Or we've seen folks successfully getting custody of children based on, what if their mom exposes them to the virus? And that could include a fear about going to a domestic violence shelter. In the meantime, domestic violence programs are getting really creative, and some of the resources I'll share with you include information about this in terms of how to use hotels, how to work with different funding streams. So for example, several states are working with FEMA to reimburse hotel stays or other rentals to support survivors. Some folks are getting cash assistance, flexible cash assistance to survivors, which is probably the #1 thing that we hear about through community development block grants, social service block grants, TANF, and other sources. So once the stay-at-home orders are lifted and people feel like they can leave their home, which is going to take a minute, then we expect to see a huge surge in demand, particularly for housing and shelter, but for all types of economic justice resources. And we work on a lot of disasters, and this is very similar to what we've seen after hurricanes or things like the BP oil spill, where folks are stuck in their homes, the economy was heavily hit, resources were limited. The requests for service and shelter peaked 6 to 9 months after those tragedies. So I think some folks think, well, we'll just get through this, right? But it's going to be really a long game that we're looking at with a high demand for shelter and services. So we're working very hard at the national level here to get more funding dedicated to shelters, to rental assistance, to short-term assistance that can include like paying utilities, moving expenses, first month's rent, and other supports. So there's a lot available, and we'll provide a link that shows you many of the things that are out there already, but it's not enough. So we're working very hard trying to get more out there. For example, we were able to secure $45 million for emergency domestic violence programs, but when you stretch that across 56 states and territories, it doesn't go very far. So there's a lot to do, and we know that you all are dealing with incredible crunches in your funding and the services you're providing, and you're creative and you're resilient and you're doing amazing work. And thank you for that. We're going to keep doing everything we can here. Some of the resources that we have that you can use include guides on how to do virtual advocacy. All right, a lot of people are adding chat hotlines now because it may not be safe to call on the phone or even to use computer chat, right? I might only have access to a text-based phone. So we have advice about how do you add a text service safely, right, for you as a service provider, and how else can you do digital services that are safe for you and maintain confidentiality for the survivors you're working with. We have, through one of our partnerships, an extensive series of webinars, organization that's made up of multiple of us called Safe Housing Partnerships, and we'll get that out to you. I would say something else that you may find useful, we have a plain language legal assistance hotline, womenslaw.org, where we'll respond to emails from survivors who are going through the process pro se. So they've been doing a lot about helping survivors navigate restraining orders and other court system needs right now through virtual granting of restraining orders and other things that courts are doing right now. So I can answer questions about housing, shelter, federal housing resources, other things like that, and we'll get you a whole list of points that we hope are helpful to you. Many of them are compiled on our own website, nnedv.org/coronavirus, but I'm going to give you some direct links. Look for that in the chat box momentarily.
Thank you, Allison. And finally, let's go to Joanna and/or Emmanuel.
Yeah, I can start. This is Joanna Ain. I and Emmanuel are both from Prosperity Now, and we both work on the policy team over there. And we're going to do a little bit of tag teaming right now. And just to quickly introduce myself before I turn it over to Emmanuel, I'm an associate director, again, of policy. I focus on policies that a lot of what I'm going to talk about is helping families to save, and then turning the tax code right side up so that it benefits our low and moderate income families. But again, Emmanuel is going to talk more about Prosperity Now as a whole and what the big picture of what we do.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Joanna, and thank you everyone for the opportunity. So as Joanna mentioned, I'm also an associate director at the organization. And while we as a whole don't focus, our time, or I guess don't spend a lot of time focusing on intimate partner violence survivors, we do and have since 1979 focus a lot of our energy, through research, policy, and programs to make it a little bit more possible for low and moderate income families and really our most vulnerable communities to have the resources they need to be able to save and invest and achieve long-term economic security. And so for an organization like ours, echoing what other panelists have already said, that have been doing this work for quite some time. This crisis that we're in now is just, I think, another reminder, and this one, a very public one, that too many people will be, one unexpected emergency away from going over the edge, and that too often our most vulnerable are the ones that bear the biggest brunt of hardships that come from any emergency, but obviously one at the scale that we're facing now. Just to close it out for me here, in terms of today's conversation and what we've been focused on and working on over the last few months, that Congress has been working on and putting down, has been the one-time recovery stimulus checks or stimulus payments, expanded unemployment benefits, suspension of student loan payments, relief to small businesses and nonprofits through the PPP loan program, and then relief to homeowners and renters. And while we don't necessarily work in very deep detail in a lot of those issues, we've been trying to keep up to date as much as we can and providing as much information to our community champions, and then also, weighing in on Congress in the areas that we have expertise on. So I will pass it back to Joanna.
Great. Yeah. So again, as Manuel just said, as Erica said at the very beginning, unfortunately, the pandemic is highlighting all these pieces that we've unfortunately known for a really long time. One of the really big pieces of data that Prosperity Now talks about is that 37% of households in the United States are in liquid asset poverty. So that means they cannot survive at the poverty level, so a very basic level, for 3 months with the loss of a job, when someone gets sick, when someone dies, with the loss of income. We don't know what these numbers are going to be today. These numbers are from a little ways back before the pandemic, so we can only imagine that these are even more extreme now. And then, of course, we know for households of color, these numbers are even worse. We're talking 58% of households of color are in liquid asset poverty. So Prosperity Now really works to, again, promote savings, try to turn the tax code right side up, try to get benefits to people who really need them the most. Just 3 I want to highlight, and that we've been really working hard to get in the stimulus packages as they roll out. We are on, Congress is talking about the 4th stimulus package. There may be a 5th. We're looking for increased funding for free tax preparation. There's been a number of you, especially Jamie, has talked about the importance of taxes to get families tax refunds, the importance of the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit. There are 3,700 free tax preparation what we call VITA sites, volunteer income tax assistance sites, throughout the country. They help 1.5 million households each year. A lot of these organizations are doing taxes virtually, are doing drive-in taxes right now. So that's a really important resource to know about. We are trying to get more funding, as these sites are obviously going to be open for 3 more months because of the extended tax filing season. We know a lot of people are doing taxes that haven't necessarily done them in the past couple of years in order to get these really critical stimulus payments. So that's really one very important resource. Another problem that we've been seeing and we continue to see is this choice a lot of families have to make between saving for their future or even saving in the short term versus getting public benefits, getting their LIHEAP, getting their SNAP or their food stamps, getting TANF, getting Social Security. So really working on what we call removing savings penalties from public benefits programs. In some states, even as little as $1,000 will get families kicked off of these public benefits programs. So really making sure that families are able to save without fear for dealing with their needs and taking care of their needs today, like nutrition, like heating assistance. And then lastly, just, again, the importance of emergency savings, again, this 40% number that a lot of us here, 40% of us don't have $400 for emergencies. That will, I can't imagine what that number is now. How can we help our families, our low and moderate income families, save for emergencies, which keep happening? And unfortunately, we're in the middle of that emergency right now. We're thinking of bills that help families defer 20% of their refund. It's called Refund to Rainy Day Savings Act. It's been introduced bipartisan in Congress. Thinking of how to help families defer a portion of their tax refund for a rainy day for perhaps 6 months so that they get another boost later in the year. So yeah, that's generally speaking. Emmanuel and I, we can talk about consumer protection, taxes, financial security in general. We're really excited to be here and have a host of other people who can talk to those things as well. So just excited for the conversation. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Joanna and Emmanuel. And I think we're going to go to the first question. And this question is for Jamie. So is there anything in the works to allow for an economic impact payment, or the stimulus check, as people are calling it, for it to go to a child who is born in the US, obviously with full citizenship rights and Social Security number, but whose parents do not qualify for the EIP due to being undocumented immigrants?
Well, that's a great question. And before I answer it directly, I want to just mention briefly who does and who doesn't qualify for an EIP, which is the economic impact payment or the stimulus check, because that will help sort of give the question some context. So one can qualify for a stimulus check if you're a US citizen or a US resident alien, if you are not a dependent of another taxpayer, if you've got what is referred to as a work eligible Social Security number, and your income is below a certain level. And so that excludes a number of different people. The children in question are US citizens who presumably can be claimed as dependents by their parents or by someone. And if the someone are, for example, undocumented parents or parents who for some other reason don't qualify because of their immigration status, then there will be no stimulus check paid for these children as well. This problem is certainly on the radar of a number of different advocacy organizations that have appealed to Congress to do something about this very unfortunate problem in a subsequent stimulus bill. But in addition to that, the Georgetown Law Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection actually filed suit, a class action lawsuit, a little over a week ago, at the beginning of May, on behalf of 7 citizen children who are in exactly the situation that I described. They are, or as the questioner described, they are unable to receive an economic stimulus payment, and it's typically $500 per dependent or qualifying child because their parents are undocumented. And the lawsuit is alleging discrimination under the United States Constitution. It's filed in the U.S. District Court for Maryland. You know, it's great news that a lawsuit has been filed. Unfortunately, we know how lawsuits are. They take a while. But there are at least advocacy organizations that have the power to lobby that are presumably also pushing Congress to do something about remedying this particular situation. So it's a great question.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Let's move on to the next question, and it's kind of related because we're talking about a lawsuit, but this is more about courts. And Laura, this is a question for you. How are courts responding to the immediate economic needs of survivors?
So I'm in New York, and I'm just going to start by saying poorly. The reality is many states in the Northeast have closed their courts and gone to a virtual court system that is very limited to essential filings. The court systems tend to not see financial issues as essential. So I can't speak for the whole country, and I do know there are states that are staying open. But I can tell you that any kind of economic distress by someone experiencing domestic violence is not going to be seen as the courts as essential. We have tried to loop things in. So in family court, for example, in New York, when you ask for an order of protection, you can ask for emergency child support. So we have tried to loop things in that direction. We do know that there are people who are unemployed, who are not getting, whose partners or ex-partners are unemployed, so they're not getting the monies that they need. And some of that is because the ex-partner is not sending anything from the unemployment check, and some of it is because our unemployment systems are crashing, similar to the IRS, and so it's difficult to get through to anything. My only suggestion in working with the courts is if you can link anything financial to safety, to an order of protection or a protective order, it may be the only way to get into the court system. Also, courts are not really hearing new cases unless it is linked to restraining orders. So, if you say I need a restraining order and your state allows you to ask for finances, then document out everything. I need a restraining order because I need to move. Here's where I need to move to. Or if I stay, here's what the rent is. Here's what the food bill is. This is what we need from them. I know his income or her income to be X because of this. Anything that you can do to give the courts as much information as possible so that when they are deciding it, and it will be decided quickly with very limited testimony. Many courts are just doing over the phone. Many of our clients don't have the technology to really participate in the courts effectively. So there's a lot of barriers there. The best thing I can say is if you are helping clients prepare any petition, put aside the fact that it's not going to be evidence and it's not valid. Just throw it all in there and let the judge make the determinations. And hopefully they'll be more forgiving. But right now, there's very few essential services that have to do with finances that the courts are listening to.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And you also mentioned earlier that bankruptcy court is up and running uninterrupted, correct?
Well, they are running virtually, but the federal system, and anyone else who does bankruptcy is welcome to speak on this too. The federal system has always had an ability to e-file. So, and it's always been many steps ahead of most state courts. So they are accepting bankruptcies. Bankruptcy courts are busy. They are doing creditors meetings, which are the first step in most Chapter 7 bankruptcies virtually. They are not forgiving with technology for your clients, so you definitely have to set your client up for the various technologies that the bankruptcy courts are using, but they are fully accepting petitions. The only thing I will add about filing bankruptcies, because in many states debt collection has stopped in certain avenues, and because in many states they're not garnishing wages and garnishing and levying bank accounts, and because it's possible that the client's debts are going to get higher and higher, I would recommend really talking to a bankruptcy expert. Now may not be the time to file bankruptcy. Even though the courts are open, you may want to wait until this is over and see what, unfortunately, new debts have accrued. So, so bankruptcy right now, I'm telling my clients, unless my clients are in a perfect world and they're still getting paid the full salary, I'm telling my clients to just hold off.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, next question. This is for Joanna or Emmanuel or both. A lot of people are wondering about what to do post-COVID, whenever that is. How can we use the pandemic as an opportunity to advance economic policies? Joanna, you said earlier, we got to turn the tax code upside down. Can you tell us more about what, what advocates and attorneys and others can do when they face restrictions around engaging in policy advocacy?
I think that's a great question, right? I think, we're in this moment of we will definitely hear about this as well. We're in this moment of complete crisis, and that, thinking about how to make major changes is a little bit, as we've talked about it for years, but it's a little bit at a pause as we're dealing with these issues that are so pertinent and so immediate, and how to get people through the week, through the day, how to get stimulus payments into people's hands, how to get unemployment into people's hands, how to make sure that people are stable today. Prosperity Now is always thinking also that, however, moving forward, once this crisis passes, how are we going to help people start saving for the future, saving for retirement again, saving for home ownership again, saving for emergencies again? How are we going to keep that conversation going also on the employer level? How can employers help hopefully people, again, will be employed? How can we help employers? Help their employees be stable, whether that's through emergency savings, through retirement savings. So just seeing the need of keeping the conversation going. Today it's very difficult to have these conversations because of everything that's happening today and the need to keep people stable today, but making sure that, as the months go by, we remember this moment and remember things that we can put into place so that when this crisis happens again, and it will, I'm sorry, I forgot who, but someone was mentioning, the 2008 recession. I was doing, running a program with stimulus money then, a homelessness prevention program then. These crises are going to keep happening, and how can we help our families, our low and moderate income families, be stable so that they can survive and thrive under these very, very destructive conditions. But I do want to turn it over to Emmanuel, who I know has.
So I'll just add just a couple more points. I think just to the tax code piece, I guess overall, we've spent, or Congress has spent $2+ trillion. It is anticipated to spend a sizable amount moving forward. After we get through this on the other end, I would hope that we come out better for it, but odds are we may just continue with the same kind of dynamics. And so in that case, we need to be pushing our elected officials in DC and throughout the country to be thinking about our most vulnerable and providing as much resources and support to uplift them. And so back to the tax code example, right now, I think we estimate that we spend through the federal tax system about $700 billion on asset building tax incentives. Most of those, unsurprisingly, go to high income earning families, and very few, relative go to low and moderate income families, particularly low income families. And that's not by accident, it's a choice that the system is so skewed to the top. We know that Congress can create programs that provide relief to our most vulnerable, and you can see that in something like the Earned Income Tax Credit, or in the 2008 crisis, you could see that to some extent in the first-time home buyers credit. And so I think as we go through this, I don't necessarily think we need to wait until it's all done. I think we have to just continue beating the drum that the systems that we had did not work, and it's very clear with 33 million people unemployed at the moment that they clearly did not work. And so we need to invest in people. And at the state level, I think we need to invest in ensuring that we have good government that is effective and can deal with the unexpected. If we're asking everyday families to save some of their income for a rainy day to get through kind of a tough patch, some of our state systems need to be in those same positions as well.
Andrea, I see that you had your hand up to add something.
Yeah, so one concrete way advocates can help right now and use kind of the momentum of this epidemic to help consumers and help clients is with state exemptions. So many states have very low exemptions for wages, bank accounts, cars, homes. And so we're seeing some states really taking the lead to use this time and use this momentum to approach legislators and try and get their state exemptions higher. Because we know that the debt collectors are going to come out, there's going to be huge amounts of debt, and they're going to sue our clients who may default, who may not show up, who may not be able to respond to that. And ultimately what happens is a wage garnishment or a bank account garnishment. And that's devastating, especially now. It's just devastating for our clients. So getting those exemptions raised and using this as kind of leverage to do that, this is a really good time to try and promote that for wages, bank accounts, cars, homes, any other personal property. So that's one concrete way advocates can really get out there and use this to try and change some very concrete policies.
Thanks, Andrea. Next question. I think Katie can take this one if you want, Katie. Or also, I know Allison, you talked about maintaining confidentiality when services are provided via some software chat system, cell phone, texting. So a lot of providers have had to switch over to virtual contact with survivors. Do you have any suggestions on how to make these secure, how to have these conversations with survivors, and how to basically approach this new way of providing these services virtually, but also reaching out to people and making sure that they are getting the help that they need? So not just waiting for them to come to you, the advocate, but reaching them and making sure they know there's a way during the pandemic to get help.
Well, I'll just mention some of the resources that we have that you can use, and Katie can talk more specifically. So on our website, we have a whole cluster of technology safety resources that talk really specifically about what kinds of software are safer to use, right? Zoom, not properly encrypted, but there are multiple other software platforms which are free. You don't have to pay extra money, that are fully encrypted and would comply with like Violence Against Women Act and Family Violence Prevention and Services Act requirements. You can also add chat and text capacity relatively affordably. And so we have links to a variety of different software providers who we think are relatively safe for you to use for that, as well as recommendations for doing one-on-one chats or one-on-one video conferences. In fact, we have a whole digital services toolkit because it's easier said than done, right? You can't just say, oh, we're switching everything virtual. And one of the biggest barriers that we hear about is, the lack of access to broadband internet and other technology for survivors. So I know some domestic violence programs, are trying to provide phones to survivors. And so this is, again, part of that need for flexible financial assistance for survivors. So whatever that looks like for them to meet their needs. Domestic violence programs can use several of the different recent federal sources of funding to increase your own broadband and to upgrade your own software and technology. Some programs didn't have laptops, right? They didn't have work from home. So you can, within appropriate guidelines, use federal funding to make those upgrades and provide those digital services. But then you want to let survivors know that a perpetrator might be looking at their internet history, and how can they do it safely. So we've got loads of tips on that. So I will paste some specific links into the chat, and please call on us for that, because we've got lots of expertise, and our staff team, their contact info will be in there. We'd be happy to answer your questions directly if you have follow-up.
That's great. I think Allison answered those questions amazingly. The other pieces I would say is just a lot of it is having conversations or texts or however you are communicating with clients about what are the ways that you're going to increase safety for that survivor as you're having those conversations. So if a child was to walk in the room, what will the person say about who they're talking to? What if it's their mother that they're staying with and their mother doesn't know that they're talking with a provider? What if it's their abusive partner? What would be those things? What would they say? What would they want us to say? Having those so safety planning conversations as we're planning how we're doing our services and how we would move forward in that way. I think those are really important. So I definitely would send everybody to NNEDB they have amazing resources. I wanted to answer a little bit from your last question as well. And what I feel really hopeful about as we think about not necessarily policy changes, but thinking about moving forward, I'm really hopeful that this will really expand who advocates are partnering with and which organizations are looking to see what kind of work can we do together. So are we reaching out to anti-poverty organizations in our area? Are we reaching out to EITC providers? Are we to tax help providers? Are we reaching out to consumer lawyers? Are we reaching out to different immigrant organizations that are doing amazing work? And so I'm really hopeful that this will expand some of our partnerships in the future. And I'm also really hopeful that it will increase our economic advocacy tool belt, that we have, so that advocates feel more confident in doing economic work and that becomes a part of their process. I know that our culture has shifted in the last 10 to 20 years in domestic violence advocacy to add more economic work, but I think this may be the shift to really get folks recognizing that economic work has to happen all the time as we're working with survivors, and give them the confidence that advocates can do this work really well.
Thanks, Katie. And I think you, Katie, can probably help us answer the following question, or anybody, just a question for the group. To address consumer needs of low-income and or immigrant clients in a remote setting, do you have any resources, any suggestions on how to, this is, of course, much worse because of what's happening with COVID, but I think it also applies in general to everyone who's working, advocates who are working with remote clients, low-income immigrants regularly. So any resources, anything that could be helpful, particularly now?
I would love to hear from what other people have to say. I think, again, reaching out to understanding what sort of services are offered in your community and in sort of your area and what folks are doing is going to be really important as you're working with folks that don't have documentation. And I would love to hear if other people have ideas as well. I think this goes to show too that this is just an ongoing issue within our society, that we don't have the services and the needs that we have, especially for folks without documentation. And this, again, as everybody's been saying, is laying this bare that we need more. We need more access to emergency funds that are flexible. And so I just lift that up as well, and to acknowledge how frustrating that and painful that is as an advocate to not have the resources that we want or need to be able to provide for folks, and that we can still sit with folks as they're dealing with that, and not turn away from that, but try to kind of as much as we can dig deep, ask good questions, connect people as much as we can, and be as present as possible in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is why, as I was asking the question, I was wondering, what resources did we have before? Because I've done work in very remote towns, and I'm thinking, well, actually, this is not a brand new problem when you're working in those settings. There aren't many resources. So I was also curious personally to find out if there were any that we could talk about. Laura, did you have a comment? No? I thought I saw someone unmute themselves. Okay, we can move on to the next question. A lot of people have questions about organizations and programs. For example, what steps will agencies take to keep staff and clients safe? Do you have any examples of the ways these agencies are implementing procedures for safety upon reopening?
So I just want to start by saying that one of the things we have to, we're a neighborhood office at Legal Aid, so we have people who walk in off the street, and that may be their only opportunity to talk to a lawyer. So I know we've been talking about everyone should have to wear a mask, providing masks for people. The courts have been talking about having those temperature scans. So every time you walk into court, your temperature will be scanned. And I think all those are good ideas, and I definitely think they're needed, but we also have to recognize that we have to temper all that with our clients. And so if you're telling clients they can't come into your office without a mask, you have to be providing them with a mask. Otherwise, what if they don't have one? Or, what if that's what the abuser's saying? I'm not giving you a mask, you can't leave the house. So we really have to look at all these things. When we talk about the court system, if you're going to tell someone they can't enter the court for their court date, you have to have a mechanism to get that information to the judge so they're not defaulted. So everything that we talk about that we want, we also have to look at the flip side, which is if we get it, how is this going to affect our clients? And how can we protect our clients through all this? And how can we make sure that the court system recognizes that not everyone walks into court with a lawyer who can run up to the judge and say, this is what's going on, Your Honor, don't default my client. Not everyone understands a language that a court officer is going to speak when they tell them you're not allowed to come into the courthouse or into our offices for that matter. So, so we are looking at especially, again, New York City, we're kind of been hard hit. So we're looking at a lot of different things, but we also have to look at how this is going to affect our work with the clients who just walk into our offices. So.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. And nobody really knows when, things are gonna, as we said earlier, things are constantly evolving. So, and it also depends on where you are located and where you're serving your clients. So, but thanks for providing those examples. Next question we have is about stimulus checks. So Jamie, I'm going to go back to you. And one of the questions that came up a lot was some individuals have not received their checks because they were not distributed. I'm assuming these are the group of people who did not have the direct deposit. So if you could talk a little bit about folks who are waiting for their checks to be mailed, others who were not eligible. I think you already covered eligibility, and an example of an abuser who took over the bank account is not giving the survivor their share of the check. how would you advise someone who has not received the check, and what would you tell people who, whose abusive partner has taken the money? Is there anything that courts can do about lost or stolen stimulus money, essentially?
Okay, well, there are a variety of different, sort of issues kind of all surrounding this question about getting your stimulus payment. And one thing I want to address first is, what do you, in general, what do you have to do to get a stimulus check? And it really depends upon your circumstances. So for example, if you are an individual who receives Social Security benefits or SSI benefits or Railroad Retirement Board benefits or VA compensation and pension benefits, and you don't have any dependents and you don't have a spouse, you really didn't need to do anything or don't need to do anything to get your stimulus check. If you were getting your benefits directly deposited into your bank account, that's how your stimulus check is supposed to come. And if you were getting, for example, Social Security checks in the mail, then that's how your stimulus payment is going to come. Now, folks who filed 2018 or 2019 tax returns should receive stimulus payments in one form or another. And I'm sort of addressing the simple situations first. If you filed a 2018 tax return and it had a account for a direct deposit of a refund, then the stimulus payment should have been direct deposited into that bank account, assuming that it was still open. Some folks filed 2018 returns that showed a balance due, and so they didn't include a bank account. And for a while, although it has now ended, IRS had a tool on its website called Get My Payment, where individuals could input bank account information. They couldn't change existing bank account information, which posed an enormous problem for survivors. But that rule was implemented to prevent fraudulent changes in bank account information. And so that tool was taken down finally yesterday at noon. And so now, if you haven't filed a 2019 tax return and you're not a recipient of one of the benefits I mentioned, if you have a filing requirement based upon your filing status, meaning basically that you made enough money to be required to file a tax return, and IRS has a calculator for that on its website, then you need to file a 2018-2019 tax return. And how are you going to get that done if VITA sites are not open? And I'll answer that in just a second. But if you didn't have a filing requirement, there is still a tool on the IRS website called Non-Filers Enter Payment Information Here. And that's where you can go onto this tool, and you can provide, you need to have your, bank account information. It's too late to put that in now. That ended yesterday, but you can provide some information about yourself and your dependents, and IRS will send you a stimulus check. Now, when? That was the beginning of this question. I remember that. When are you going to get your stimulus payments? Well, that Get My Payment tool is still in existence, but right now it's only available to use to find out when and how you are going to get your payment. So if you go online and you need to have your your name and your date of birth and your Social Security number and information about your 2018 or 2019 return if you filed one, and you need to be able to type your address in all caps. It seems to work better if you use all caps. Then the IRS tool will tell you that it has mailed you a check and you should be getting it by Friday, May 15th, for example, or that it will mail you a check and you will get it by June 1st. And at least going by the information that IRS is putting out, it expects checks for people who fit into one of the categories that I mentioned, to get a check by the end of June. Now, you know, there are folks who didn't file 2018 or 2019 tax return, and they maybe don't have access to a computer, a safe access to a computer in order to use that non-filers enter payment information here. You know, if necessary, you can file to get your stimulus check when you file your 2020 tax return in the spring of 2021. Now that does you absolutely no good financially right now, but this these stimulus payments, these economic impact payments, are actually a refundable credit for your 2020 tax return. And so when you file your tax return 2020, you can still get it then. And it's not too late to file 2018 or 2019. Now, you did ask also, Isla, I believe, the person who asked wanted to know about the problems that come up when a survivor has filed perhaps jointly with an abusive spouse, and the abusive spouse has gotten the check or the deposit and refuses to share it. And then there are also situations where the abuser has filed a joint return without the participation or consent of the survivor, and is getting the full stimulus payment, or even filed individual returns and claimed children that belong to the survivor. The abuser claims those as dependents, those children as dependents, in order to get their check. As I said before, at least in the short term, IRS is not going to fix that problem for a survivor. They're not going to claw back stimulus payments that were made to the abuser when they should not have been made to the abuser, or that were not split when they would have been expected to be split. And they're not going to issue a duplicate payment or stimulus checks to the survivor when one has already been issued for their Social Security number. So, you know, what is a survivor to do? And I guess if I was going to answer that question in 3 words, those 3 words would be get tax help. Where does someone who cannot afford food or rent or other basic necessities going to get tax help? Well, throughout the United States, there are low-income taxpayer clinics. Some of them are connected with legal aid or legal services organizations. Some of them are connected with law schools. And they do provide tax help, legal help, to taxpayers who have tax problems. And this year only, they are able to file current year, that's 2019 tax returns, because people don't have access to tax return preparation if they need the assistance. And so going on the IRS website and typing in LITC, or Low Income Taxpayer Clinic, will get you to a tool that will allow you to put in your state, and the state will, once the state pops up, it'll list the LITCs in the state and the contact information. And virtually all of them are doing what they can. And, you know, they're not fully staffed to represent everyone who needs their help. That's just the way it is. But all of them are trying to make arrangements to be able to represent people remotely, which is very challenging, as we all have discovered, regardless of whether you're the person needing help or providing help. But, you know, get tax help, because there are, and I don't want to get into the weeds with a lot of the technical things unless somebody specifically asks about that, but there are some things that a survivor can do to further down the line, maximize their chance of getting the stimulus payment that they didn't get now because of an abuser's activities. They are not going to be quick, and they're not guaranteed to work, and they're probably inaccessible if you don't have the help of a tax lawyer. But they are out there, and if somebody wants to ask about that later, that's fine. But
yeah, thank you, Jamie. I think since we're running low on time, I think it'd be great to include that with the follow-up that we do after this. So we'll definitely follow up with you to get that circulated around to people. And I know with only 5 minutes left, I did want to get to a quick question about debt prioritization that either Andrea or Katie could respond to. I know, like, with sort of what Jamie just mentioned about, it being difficult, if not impossible, for some folks to get their stimulus payment at this time if they haven't already. And like people's, competing needs and debts. Do either of you, Andrea or Katie, want to say anything more about debt prioritization?
Sure, I can start, Katie, and then you can chime in. I really would recommend the Surviving Debt book. I know a lot of you probably use it, and it really is very helpful to kind of determine where this limited pot of money should go. And if they're getting a $1,200 stimulus check, where should that go? And it gives a good outline of what high priority debts are, like debts that if you don't pay them could result in garnishment of wages, or a capious for your arrest or something drastic like that. But also, your car, your home, those types of things, rather than maybe medical debt is not as high of a priority because that's not a secure debt. That's not going to result in anything right away happening to a consumer if it's not paid. So it is important to look at the full panoply of debt that a client has and try and make payments according to the level of that debt and the consequence of non-payment of that debt. And then there are little things you can do to help your client to fend off debt collectors, like sending a cease contact letter to the debt collector, helping your client send a letter saying, don't contact me anymore about this debt. And there are a lot of little tips in the book as well, some sample letters. So I just really would suggest, here, I'll show you it again. There it is. It's free online. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I would definitely second everything Andrea said, and I live with Surviving Debt next to me all the time. And I think it's also this really weird time right now where we're working with clients, and some of the things that may have been the higher priority a month ago may be lower priority now. So if you are living in a state where they are not doing evictions at the moment, it may be that your family needs food, and that is a higher priority than paying your rent at this time. And so it's kind of everything's turned on its head. And so I think understanding and knowing locally what are some of the changes that have been made in terms of debt collection and garnishments, and is going to be really important, so that you can talk through that with clients so they know as they're making decisions. And then figuring out where are programs available, if there is a way to get food or breakfast through the school system, or other things, so we can reduce some of those debts or those costs for things that are necessities of living, and then look beyond that. And I think another thing that is really important that they mention a lot in Surviving Debt and doing this work is that the loudest screaming voices aren't always the ones that we should be paying first. So we know that credit card companies want to get you to pay them because they can't really easily get money from you unless they go through the court system. So sometimes survivors get really scared about letters or get a lot of phone calls. And so I think talking about what Andrea is talking about in terms of fair debt collection practices is really important, so folks don't get intimidated into paying a debt that is not a high priority for their family, especially at this time.
Thanks, Katie and Andrea. And I think we're almost out of time. So CSAJ, we would love to thank you all, to our panelists for sharing your expertise and your time for being here doing this, answering these tough questions. I know for a lot of them, we simply don't have the answers right now. So we appreciate, you willing to come and join us and try to answer these tough questions. And to our advocates, thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating. Thank you for your questions. And thank you for all the work that you do. We admire all of you, and we want to thank you for being here. And if you still have unanswered questions and you want to go ahead and type them into the chat box right now, you can do that. If not, you can send us an email and we'll add the question and the answer to the Q&A that will be circulating. We'll be sending around an evaluation for all of you, so you can add those questions that you still have to a section that will be provided in the evaluation. And just making sure I'm not forgetting anything, you can also look at CSAJ's Guidebook, which can be accessed on our website. I believe we can also add that link to the email that you will receive. And Yvette, am I missing? Did I cover it all?
I think you've got everything. Sarah, is there anything you wanted to throw in?
I just dropped the eval link in the chat, but we'll send it around. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
This
you.
was awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.